Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Cook. I'm the chairperson of Simsbury's Community for Care, and we are the presenting committee for this program tonight, and we are very pleased to have you all here. This is an important topic, and a topic that I hope all of you watching at home and will watch closely and take to heart, because we really feel like this is something that anybody can use to help anybody at any time. And to tell us more about this, we have Tom Steen to do our Talk Saves Lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Welcome everybody, and welcome those out in the audience. Today's kind of a special week because it's Suicide Prevention Week, and actually today is Suicide Prevention Day. So it's kind of like fits right in to what Simsbury's doing here. You know, self-care is really important, so if at any point during this presentation that you feel a little uncomfortable, turn it off. Or better yet, watch it with a family or friend, family member or friend, so that you can support each other as I go over the material today. And my information is the last slide here today, and so you can certainly call me. I'm a Simsbury resident, live off Terry's Plain Road on Hunting Ridge Drive, so I'm very, very amenable and accessible should you have any questions. So thank you all, and everybody good? Self-care is so important for today's presentation. What we're going to show you today, or present to you today, is from our friends from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They're the leading organization in our country. I shared with you we have a Connecticut chapter, and the funding that allows us to go out and do these presentations comes from that chapter through what we call Out of the Darkness walks, and those are coming up. So if you're interested in participating in Out of the Darkness walk, just go to afsp.org/walks. And you will see a drop line for states. Just click Connecticut, and there'll be 6 different walks. So, and half the money that we raise through our walks stays in Connecticut. The other half goes to our national organization for research, which we're going to find out about today is very, very important. So we ask you to support us as we go forward. And most of us that go are lost survivors to suicide. So it's a real supportive, healthy way to bring a community together to support each other. So important event. Hope you can make it. So here we go. Talk Saves Lives. I don't read my slides. I'll let you read the slide. But this is the slide that tells us that it's a public health issue. Suicide is on the rise in Connecticut. It's also on the rise in our country. And so when we talk about suicide, we want to kind of get our heads around the subject because of the stigma connected to mental health and suicide. Peel it away and to just recognize that it's a public health issue. Our suicide rate in Connecticut for youth looks like it's going to double this year. So it's really even more important that we understand about suicide prevention. And if I teach you anything today, that hey, it's a public health issue, but that by the end, you'll have some skills and some, kind of some ability today, recognize when somebody is in trouble, and not be afraid to ask the question, and more importantly, how do you connect them to help? So let's go on. It's a public health issue. And the other thing is suicide can be prevented. Depending on who you talk to, it's a preventable death. It's the most preventable death. And it's really important that we always understand that it is preventable. But if we're afraid to talk about it, if we're afraid to embrace the subject, we're never going to get it out in the open, and we're never going to be able to save lives. We have to talk about it. So this is an interesting slide, and our friends from AFSP just recently put it in, and I really, really agree with it, because language matters when you talk about suicide. That the first one that you see under don'ts is committed suicide. Ladies and gentlemen, bad people commit crimes. people don't commit suicide. Suicide is a symptom of something else going on in the person's life. Many times it's a mental health disorder or disease, or it could be an addiction, or it can be both. So we really want to be really careful in how we use the word. Also, those who have lost people to suicide, that word can be very uneasy because loved ones don't commit suicide. They die by suicide. And as you can see the words there on the slide, well, that's the best way to say it. And I understand. I mean, I've trained a lot of people, and they, social workers and hospital personnel, and they still have a hard time getting away from saying the word committed. It's been so much ingrained. But if we all kind of try, I think it'll be healthy. And then the bottom one there, it's really connected to our veterans and our active military. And I know there's some people in today's audience who are in the military. Well, you know, the goal when you go into the military, it's complete the mission, successful mission. Well, if you have suicidal thought or ideation, or your PTSD or some sort of clinical depression, and you hear these kind of words, it can trigger them to complete the mission. So we want to get away from that, and certainly attempted suicide or death by suicide is really a better way to say it as opposed to complete or failed attempt. The one that's not on there that I like to share with the group is, you know, and I'm sure there'll be folks in the audience, either here in the room or, you know, out in TV land, as they say, the folks that have survived the suicide attempt. And that terminology now is moved to lived experience. And so somebody that's had that struggle and is on the path of health and wellness will use lived experience. And, you know, we find out a lot about suicide from those folks because they've been there and they understand it. It's really important. So words matter. No one expects you to change overnight, but just have a sensitivity to it, I think, is really very, very important. So today we're going to talk in basically 4 areas. The first one is statistics, and then before I put everybody to sleep in the room, it's really important to frame the public health issue. So I'm going to go over some data. Some that might be a little bit disturbing to you, but there is some good news, and I'm going to share you some of that as well when it comes to suicide prevention, postvention, and grief support when it comes to suicide. So we're going to do that statistic. Then the research, I'm going to share you a couple of research projects that are going on that our friends at AFSP are now doing. That really, really interesting information, and hopefully in the future will really help us to take on the challenge of suicide. And then we'll talk a little bit about prevention. And prevention is really protective factors. When somebody is at risk, what do we do as family and friend to help protect them, to prevent it? How do we stay better? You know, self-care, we talked a lot about self-care already. To take care of yourself so that you don't get to the point where you're struggling and then maybe beginning to think about suicide. And then the last thing is, what can you do about it? And that's the most important part of today's presentation, because I want you to go away with the idea that if you're really worried about somebody and your gut's telling you that you need to deal with that individual, feeling comfortable enough to ask the question. Come right out and say, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? You look miserable. You haven't been yourself. How many of us can do that if we're really worried about somebody? That's the challenge. You know, and part of peeling away the stigma of suicide, because that in itself can save a life. So are we ready to go? Great, let's do that. Let's do the stats. And this number is how many people die in the world each year to suicide. Think about the Vietnam War. I think 50,000 we lost 50,000 soldiers in the Vietnam War over all those years. 800,000 a year. Beginning to see that's a public health issue, yeah? Somebody in the world every 40 seconds. You know, we've been here 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the presentation so far. Do the math, right? And for every suicide, there are 25 attempts. And ladies and gentlemen, that very much correlates to what happens here in Connecticut. And you'll hear a little, I'll have a slide here in a minute about what's going on in Connecticut. But for every suicide, there are 25 people that actually have attempted and are now in that lived experience category that I shared earlier. So really, really important that we understand that suicide impacts a far-reaching a group of people, just not the individual that has lost their life. This slide talks about folks who have, and there's several different ways, but lost survivors to suicide. So is that somebody? This group of people are folks that have lost somebody. And I like to use the analogy, and they call it the ripple effect, but I like my way better. If you think about a really calm pond in the morning, in a summer morning, you know, it's like a piece of glass, and you throw a pebble or a stone, don't throw a rock, but a stone. The waves are really big at the beginning and high. That's the 115 people that this slide says. But guess what? The other rings, as they get smaller and smaller, are if we lose somebody in Simsbury, the immediate people are impacted. But think about, you know, whether it's part of the school or part of the community or part of the veterans community or part of a church community and a long-term resident. Get the idea? So it's not only 115, it's way more that are impacted. This slide can be a little confusing because yes, there's an economic impact, but this one shows what the economic impact is after a person dies, all of that lost money and revenue and things that they could have done if they hadn't left us. So it's huge, it's a big impact, and that's a big number. And we certainly need to understand that there is a financial impact, not just, you know, the emergency response and, you know, the funeral costs and the things that directly connect to a suicide death. It goes way beyond that. So here, I promised Connecticut data, so here we go. And you can see on the top left corner, we lose a person to suicide every day in our state. Every 22 hours, they say, but that's a real number, and it's a reported suicide. And how many suicides don't get reported? We're getting better at it, but that should be. It's the 11th leading cause of death in Connecticut. It's, boy, where do you think homicide is? That's what we hear on the TV news, right? And read in our newspapers. In Connecticut, it's 16th. But we don't hear about suicide. So that's pretty interesting. And that, by the way, is pretty much true for all states. You know, and, you know, we report homicides, but boy, there's a lot more people that we're losing to suicide. The other, underneath that is, you'll see a second leading cause of death from 15 to 34 years old. Well, if you contract that to 15 to 24-year-old, it's still the second leading cause of death. And so we think about our community and our young people here in Simsbury. Boy, we should be doing a lot more suicide prevention training and understanding what's going on in that group to keep them safe. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about on this slide is we're 46th out of 50 states. That sounds pretty good, don't you think? Well, how long would it take any of us in Simsbury to get to a hospital from here? 20 minutes? 15 minutes? Well, as I talk to my colleagues from AFSP from Wyoming, how long do you think it would take them to get up to a hospital? Right? We know that more women attempt suicide, or girls attempt suicide, but they use overdose or poisoning. And the data we saw today at the symposium from DPH, Department of Public Health, and their data people, that came true. It's still, 2018, still true information that women and girls are using poisoning or overdose. Men die by suicide more. And why? They use lethal means. A fact that I've been sharing with groups lately that I think is important to talk about today. We're hearing a lot about gun safety or gun control or mass shootings. You've seen them all, and you've seen them all on the news, and they're very, very tragic scenarios. But more people die by suicide via firearm than any other case. It's actually almost 60%, and that falls true to here in Connecticut as well. If 30% is homicide, only 1% is mass shootings. But are we hearing in our news and our things today, from our politicians, or we're only hearing about gun safety or gun control? We need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about parity. Physical health and mental health need to be the same. They need the same coverage and insurance, and this really tells why. It's great that we're 46, but one suicide is one too many, and we need to really work hard. And I'm that big parity guy. I go down to the legislative office building every year, and I chase after John Hampton and Kevin Milkos, and it's like, we need to do something. And I go to DC every year because we need to be more advocates for that end. The last kind of data I'm going to show you today is good news, bad news. And this is, Susan, so she knows about this. This is the Connecticut Health Survey, Youth Risk Behavioral Survey that's done every other year in Connecticut. It's randomly selected high schools. I don't think Simsbury's been selected for a while, maybe a few years. Yeah, the data I'm going to show you would not include Simsbury per se, but it's a snapshot of what's going on in our state from randomly selected high schools and a self-administered survey. So this is what the kids are saying on the survey. It's not anybody telling them what to say. It's what they're saying. And here's the slide. Celeste George from DPH gave this to me. And I'll start on the top left, and you can see this is a classroom of 30. So if you have a high school of 1,000, you can do the math. 8 kids are feeling sad or hopeless out of a classroom of 30. And we know from all of the data and research on youth suicide and mental health challenges with youth, this is a key sign. Hopelessness and helplessness. The next one is 4 seriously considered. Ladies and gentlemen, these are Connecticut students. And 2 actually attempted. Self-reported. But up to the right, you see 6 students have actually, in the past year, hurt themselves cutting or burning. And in suicide prevention work, not until recently have we connected that to a warning sign to suicide. Research now shows that it is. In the past, the experts were not so sure about it. So anytime there's cutting and burning, we should be concerned. Now the good news. I really mean it, good news. 7 students saw a doctor or a nurse about what was going on with their mental health. And this is 2017 data. In 2015, 2 students reported. Something's going on right in our schools, right? Or in our churches and our youth support agencies, because now all of a sudden kids are recognizing that their mental health is important. And then the last one, 21 students have a trusted adult at a school that they can go to. And that's probably the best news out of all of this data that I have, because in 2015, that was 7. So what that's telling us is, and anytime I do train faculty, I have them raise their hand and tap themselves on the back after I give them this information, because we know through research that trusted adults are the key component to keeping kids well when it comes to mental health and mental health struggles. Then you have to have a place to go with that information. They can't go to their friends. That's danger. They need trusted adults. So I really like that. That means we're doing something right, and we're really making significant inroads. So enough about that, and let's talk about research. It's pretty interesting stuff that's going on with AFSP. I like to walk around, but I can't leave the camera, so I'll be cool. I'll stay right here. This slide is basically telling you that suicide's complex. There's no single cause. There's no, like, when you get cancer, you can find out what cause of cancer you're on, and then you can get treatment for that. Suicidal ideation or suicidal thought is just not that way. It's complex. It's complicated, which means we have to work harder at it when somebody's at risk. 9 out of 10 people who die by suicide have some sort of form of mental health disorder or going through a mental health crisis that very regularly connect with some sort of substance or some substance abuse, because they're self-caring. We know only 1 out of 4 people actually reach out for help. So the other 3, what are they doing? Many times they use medication to make themselves, or medications like oxycodone or alcohol, and before you know it, now you have an addiction. And so that's why we really need, and that's part of the stigma issue here, is if we can peel the layers of away from suicide as far as stigma is concerned, that'll get better. 2 out of 3, or 3 out of 4, or what would be better, 4 out of 4, parity, right? So that's kind of a key component. And then there's differences in the brain. There's a research going on right now, and there's like level 2 research, there's different terms for it, but they're working with the Defense Department, and they're actually studying the brains of active military coming off active duty, and trying to study why some soldiers get PTSD and why some soldiers don't, even though they've been in the same unit and have seen some of the same stuff. And there's clear brain differences. And so that early on, there's no, don't shoot the messenger. But some real promising research that there is differences in the brain. And we thank our support with this research from the Defense Department. Most people who attempt suicide are, I call it the dark, deep place. They're in such a dark, deep place. They're in so much pain. And society's afraid to just reach down and give them a hand and pull them up. Because the pain, they really don't care about living anymore. And in our research shows that most people who are in that dark, deep place might be thinking about suicide, but do they have the capacity to attempt? And when the two come together is when the risk is most. And it's usually a 24 to 48 hour period. So we need to prevent it. We need to be upfront and talk about it. And if we're worried and our gut's saying that something's wrong with this person, we want to get to them before those two things come together. And this is the crisis point, crisis point. There is some news research now that are showing that some of the youth suicides that are occurring are impulsive. But when you pull the layers back on a suicide death of a young person, there's usually a compilation of things going on, and then one thing occurs and it's triggered, and then there's attempt and maybe even a death. So, and there's that pain's unbearable. So who's at risk? So a little bit of data. This is what the research is showing us. These are the 3 areas that, from a risk factor perspective, we need to be concerned about. And it doesn't mean that one is weighted more than the other, but they're all in place. So here are some of the health things, substance abuse disorder, bipolar disorder, and I know our assistant superintendent here is, young children are being diagnosed with this now. Before it was 21 and up, when my kids were growing up, but so these things are concern, and they're really even happening with our youth. Here are some other factors, and that last one, serious head injuries. All any NFL fans in the room with those head injuries and all of those veterans who have been taking their life, boy, they're looking at this direct evidence to brain damage due to concussion that leads to suicidal behavior, suicidal thought, and then sometimes an attempt, sometimes a death. And then the environmental factors. And these kind of go true. Access to lethal means. If more men die by suicide and they use lethal means, we need to learn to restrict that. And we'll talk about that as far as the protective factor is concerned. Exposure. Anybody that's lost somebody to suicide, that 115 people we talked about already today, those people are at risk now too. So from a community perspective, we need to care for them, to make sure as they grieve and get through their process, that they find wellness. So certainly prolonged stress and then stressful life event. Young people, my kids growing up, when they broke up with a girlfriend, it was like, oh, that's okay, they'll get over it. Then the next girlfriend will come along. Well, we now know that's a significant life issue in our young people, and we, as parents, we shouldn't push that aside. We need to speak it out and really get to find out what they're feeling about that breakup, so that we make sure that they're getting all the support they need as they go through that. Really important. So here's the historical factors, and a lot of these make sense. Certainly a history of suicide and childhood abuse, and certainly evidence of previous attempts are all things that we should look at when we talk about historical factors. And then some more other things that research is showing us is genetics. There's AFSP researchers are now looking at genetic markers, and they're beginning to find that there are similarities to folks who have died by suicide from genetic markers. And think about it from a prevention perspective. If we could know that, there's the genetic markers now for people that might be more at risk for cancer or breast cancer and such. Well, that's kind of the way they're going here, and I think it's great news. Depression, prolonged stress at work. I was at Sikorsky Aircraft doing a presentation to their employees yesterday, and I got a pretty good giggle out of that. Prolonged stress at work, but it's true, and stress can drive it, and certainly the drinking thing. Really, substance abuse can be a certain factor. So that's the research. Pretty interesting stuff, right? But we need to do more. We need to continue to look at it and really kind of get our hands around what kind of ways we can help do prevention by having better research. Yes?
On the research end, I was wondering if there's any research going on with people who have been diagnosed with a my husband and I have a friend who died by suicide because he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and, you know, at a rather young middle age. And he was very clear that he did not want his family to have to go through the care process that was ahead of them for his care.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's anybody who addresses that type of
They're beginning to collect data that will drive research to that point. What we know about folks that have a life-ending disease and you know this state is not one of those right-to-life states, or assisted suicide, which is a subject that we could stay in another hour here discussing. But the fact of the matter is, senior suicides on the increase in Connecticut, and directly connected to what you just shared. That, you know, it's life-ending stuff from where they are, and we need to research it more. I'm not aware of anything that's going on, but we know, we see it through our data. And that's data gives us the opportunity to move our limited resources to that place where we can really research it. So that's kind of where we are with that. But good question. Any other questions?
Tom, can you just summarize the question?
Oh, yes, I will do that. My apologies. Not used to this, you know. Anyway, prevention work, okay? We're going to talk about prevention now. So in prevention, it's protective factors. You know, and suicide's a lifespan issue. It doesn't know culture, it doesn't know race. It affects everybody in differing opinions, or areas, but creating protective factors around people who could be potentially struggling is really important. So here are some things that folks can do to keep themselves well, and they cover the gamut. They really do. Mental health treatment prevents suicide. Remember we said one out of every 4 really reaches out for any kind of treatment. So, but if we can get them there, they can get better. You know, a culture that knows that everybody would be smart about mental health. It's the Parity thing. Only 1 in 5. So there's some, depending on what you see, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 seek help. The thing is, we need to close that gap. So here's some other mental health treatments that are going on, and you can read the slide, and they're all pretty common. But the one I want to talk about is medication, because we've made huge strides in medication when it comes to mental health in the past 6 years, even. And so when somebody's struggling with a mental health disorder or a brain disease like bipolar, if I can give you a little biology or physiology lesson, in your brain you have receptors, and they fire, and then there's chemicals like serotonin, you know, the feel-good thing, it's serotonin. Well, for somebody that's in pretty solid mental health, all of those chemicals are balanced, and everything is firing and really good. Well, when somebody's struggling with a disorder or clinical depression, those those chemicals in there go awry. So the receptors start firing correctly, and then the disease advances or the clinical depression advances. What the medication does is it balances those chemicals in there so that so everything can fire. So, and I know there's a lot of controversy about medication, but we really need to turn the page on that, because medication really does work. Psychiatrists call it the cocktail, the medication cocktail. And as I said earlier, it's complex. The whole issue of suicide and suicidal ideation is very, very complex. So not one cocktail works for one person, it won't work for the other person or the other person. It's all very, very unique. So the key thing is to get people to understand that they are suffering and that there's a way to get better. And take these medications. You might have to take them the rest of your life, but they'll make you better, is the key. So that's how did I do, teacher? I keep it very basic when I do that. But it's true, and you know, understanding that stuff is pretty intense. So and there's the parity slide. You know, and the Affordable Health Care Act is driving it towards parity, but our Senator, Chris Murphy, he's like the pioneer, he's like the point person. Kind of took over where Senator Kennedy left off after he passed away, to be the kind of that champion. And when I see Senator Murphy, he says, we just scratched the surface. We need to do a lot more with parity. And here are your self-care things. These all make sense to me. I wish I could do the sleep thing, but heck, my wife, I fall asleep in the chair at night and I get the call at 2 o'clock in the morning, come to bed. So off I go. But these all make sense. You know, all make sense to us all that we need. And then limiting access to lethal means prevents suicide. You know, we're lucky. We live in Connecticut, where there's some really good gun safety legislation on the books, where firearm owners need to lock up their firearms, need to lock their ammunition in a separate location. The gun stock thing, all kinds of things that are happening that can certainly save lives. But as family members, if there's a firearm in a home and especially a male, and they're suffering, we need to take steps to secure the firearm, because our data shows that. And you know, lethal means doesn't mean a firearm. It can mean just about anything. You know, a single car accident going 100 miles an hour in a tree, one person in and no skid marks. Is it an accident or is it suicide? I always like, when I'm doing training with parents, I always pull my phone out at this slide, because this is a lethal mean for kids. This is more deadly than a firearm when it comes to children. You know, little Sally and little Johnny tell me that they pay for their own cell phone, then they can say they own it. But parents need to control this thing. It's dangerous. You just put in, you know, how do I kill myself in a browser? And this is nothing that children already know. It is scary. And so educating and having that, speak it out with our kids, that how dangerous this thing can become. We were talking earlier about, predators on the internet, and yeah, they're out there too. But my kids grew up, my kids are in their 30s now, but the computer was in the family room. The box was this big, the screen was that big, and we were looking over their shoulders and what's going on, and that AOL instant messenger thing, and what they were. This thing has 300 times the computing power. And my oldest is 33, so you kind of do the math about, where he was 15. I was only, 15, 18 years ago. Wow. Need to control it. Parents. So, and here are some other areas. CO2 sensors in cars. Have you seen recently, there's a bumper-to-bumper traffic, and all of a sudden a person in a brand new car, the car shuts off and won't start? It's a CO2 sensor. You're in a traffic jam, and the car is sensitive. And unfortunately, in years gone by, that CO2 was a common method of folks dying by suicide, but it's really hard to do now because of that sensor, unless you're an older car. Barriers on bridges. There's some really good news in Connecticut about that. Our Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board has been working with the Department of Transportation to put signage up. So I know the town of East Windsor, that Bear Bridge, over there, they're putting signage up now, and they're putting all kinds of safety things in. The Aragoni Bridge, there's all kinds of work being done on Aragoni Bridge. So really good stuff there. And it's just safe messaging, call 211, you know, your life matters to us, just some safe, you know, self-care kind of messaging, so when somebody goes to a bridge or a high place, you know, there's messages that there's help. And then, of course, the packages, a string of packages for medication, to make it hard. You know, you can go to Sam's Club or Costco and buy a whole 500 unit thing of Tylenol. Well, if you take enough Tylenol, it can kill you. You know, if you're parents out there or homeowners out there, if you're buying that and put that in a secured locked place, that bottle, and just have another bottle that maybe has only like 10 or 20 in your medicine cabinet. Secure it. It just makes sense. And of course, firearm safety, and we've already talked a lot about that. And you know, firearm education and safety is always an important thing for any community. Not only Simsbury, but throughout the state. Support lost survivors to suicide and with lived experience, because they're at risk. And I like to share in this slide that, and I call it the casserole days after somebody dies by suicide. The casseroles will show up, the call, people knocking on the door. And that stuff is really, really important, especially when families are in mourning and beginning to move on to grieving. But what about the weeks and the months and the year afterwards? Guess what? That's even more important, to stay connected. So as a community, we need to do that when there's a loss, or certainly when somebody struggles with a lived experience. And I know from talking to our leadership in town that they're very sensitive about this. Our school system, our social services center. So we're doing a good job here. Could we do better? Absolutely. But this is good news here for Simsbury. So now, what can you do? This is where you're going to come home and you're going to know about, and you're going to have a homework assignment. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes because we're getting close to the end here. But what can I do? No warning signs. And certainly don't be afraid to reach out. And then, you know, some of us in the room I know are social workers or maybe a psychologist. You know, but our job as citizens and as members of the community, when we think somebody's at risk, our job is to connect them to the pros that can really help. You know, I don't have a social worker degree, but I know people who do. And so if somebody is at risk and I think needs help, I'll know where to go to connect them for the help. And that's what we all need to do as citizens of Simsbury. Here are the warning signs: talk, behavior, and mood. Pretty self-explanatory. You know, these kind of messages under talk are red flags, and should be all very sensitive to it. The other thing I like to share in this slide as you read through these is that anytime somebody talks about suicide, it should alarm you and immediately make you ask more questions. As I've trained trainers in suicide prevention work, we call it content to context. So if Tom doesn't get a raise, wants a raise, and he doesn't get the raise, or he's talking to his buddy and saying, well, if I don't get the raise on my job, I think I'm going to kill myself. Well, or you know, I'm just going to die by suicide. Well, that in itself might not mean anything, but if you knew that Tom was going through a divorce, the house is getting ready to be repossessed, there was all kinds of family problems, you get the idea, content to context. Well, if all that stuff was happening, then that message was really important, and yes, more questions. Our youth now use that suicide word very flippantly. And we got it to me, and when I'm in front of school faculty, I really encourage them that this is a teachable moment. First of all, when somebody starts using suicide, you're going to immediately stop and ask a question. And two things are going to happen. One, you're going to figure out, well, they're figure of speeching. To me, it's the teaching moment. So when you use the suicide word, I get really worried. So maybe we can find a better word to talk about your stress. So like, if you don't get into that AP class this time, well, maybe I can help you to get it into it the next time. You know, it's okay to be disappointed. But if you're talking to a young person and you use the suicide word and you start asking questions and you're starting to see risk factors and warning signs, they're depressed, they have, you know, their physical appearance is changing, those kind of things, then that suicide word does mean something. Content to context. So here's some behavioral things. You know, you can read through the list. I worry about the bottom one. Through my work with suicide prevention training, and talking to families who have lost somebody to suicide, giving away prized possessions, whether you're young or you're old, means that something is going on in that person's head. There might even be a plan. So giving away prized possessions is pretty important. Withdrawing from activities. And people who are thinking about suicide, so they have suicidal thought over here, but they're way over on this side is having the capacity of actually attempting suicide. They're communicating in coded ways. They won't maybe be as direct. So you got to be a little bit more sensitive about it. Gee, when you say, you know, well, if I wasn't around tomorrow, no one would miss me anyway. That's a code message. We should ask more questions. Now, content to context, maybe not. But boy, if there is something going on, you can take action. And then here's the moods. Certainly the anxiety thing. You're impulsive. And there's some new research, and I want to stop over the superintendent's office and talk to folks about some of the new research coming out about that when it comes to our young people. Some interesting stuff coming out that things are going on in their life, but it's one significant thing that triggers. And remember what I said about this being deadlier than a firearm? We need to be sensitive to that, especially with our younger people. But all of these things apply to all ages. We just need to be concerned. And I like to slide the best. Trust your gut. Better to be on the safe side, you know. And you can see Tom is, Tom isn't really doing very well. I'm really worried about him. You know, I know I'm going to go up and I'm going to ask him, is he thinking about suicide? Now, maybe I'm not, and maybe I'm going to get really mad at you, but better to lose a friend than to lose a soul, right? So, to me, trust your gut. When I did the training at Sikorsky Aircraft, one of the employees, you know, raised their hand. It's like, wow, because they had lost an employee about 6 months ago. And everybody's gut was telling them that this employee was in trouble. But because what you know at the time is what you know, no one asked them the question. No one, you know, moved further beyond what was going on with that young man, so that just maybe they could have saved him. And, you know, talk saves lives. You know, we're all here today. You're here today because you're not afraid to talk about it. But there are a lot of people out there that's your homework, is you got to get out and encourage people that it's okay to talk about it. We need to talk about it. You know, we talk about incest, we talk about spousal abuse, we've talked about all kinds of subjects in our world, but we don't talk about suicide. We need to start doing that because it will save lives. If we can get everybody to talk about it. You know, if you do get somebody to the point where they're ready to tell you what's going on, this is how you do it. Talk privately. Listen. Yeah, you know, my friend Tom, you know, I'm going to ask him, and he says, yeah, I have been thinking about suicide. Yeah, I am in the dumps. Let him tell the story. Tell him that you're concerned, that you're important to me, and what you're telling me is important. And I believe in what you're telling me, and I want to help you. Giving a message of hope, really critical. be afraid to ask directly about suicide. And then really get them to professional help. You can call 211. If you press 1 and then you press 1 again, you get a social worker at 211. And there's one 24/7. So if you can get that person to talk to a social worker on the 211 line, great. Or if you're worried about somebody but really don't know what to do about how to ask, call the 211 line, ask the social worker. They'll tell you. And they'll give you the information, support. I can't remember what Tom told me at the training, but you've got resources there to do it. Always, always seek help. Always, always. With young people, if they share that they're suicidal, you never leave their person. You connect them to help right away. The social workers and the therapists call it the warm pass, right? Literally take that young person to help. Really very important. Avoid minimizing the feelings. Don't think you can fix it because, we're not all social workers. And when somebody's really in that dark, deep place, telling them that their life is worth it, not going to work. Just say, I care about you. I want you to live, and I will help you to get the help so that you can feel better. Is the kind of the way to say it, so that they feel comfortable and more approachable about it. Stay with them. Remove the lethal means. We've talked a lot about that today. And do that beforehand. That's like a prevention thing. Not wait to then secure them and then escort them right to help. Even if you got to take them to the emergency room. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's a minister or a priest or somebody in their religious community. Sometimes it's really just connecting them to a spouse or to a significant other to begin to build that safety net underneath them so that they could connect to help and get better. So here's some information for you all. You can write this down. If you don't have anything to write down, I'll have my information up there in a minute, and you call me and say, Tom, send me that slide. No problem, I'll do it. But the 211 line I already talked about, and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, if you call that 8100 in Connecticut, you get 211. We're one of the only states that happens in. So it's a direct connection. So you don't have to talk to Wyoming. If you call the 8100 number, you might get somebody in your state, or you might, based on the queue, might be pushed off to another state. And if you're at risk, or somebody that you love is at risk, you want local help. So 211's good thing here. The Trevor Project, our LGBTQ plus community is 4 times more at risk than their counterparts. So we got to be real sensitive about that. And that, it's not 800, it's 866. Trevor Project, great resource, great people. You can call them at any time. You can reach out. There are all kinds of research. And then that bottom line, I call it the suicide prevention text line. It's really the crisis text line. Sorry, Tom. Did a little liberty there. But if you text to CT or home and then 74741, you get a Connecticut volunteer who answers your text messages. And depending on what in the text message, if there's some like flagged words and things, they move up the queue and then actually get directly connected to 211. And with youth, they call the mobile crisis center to have somebody respond immediately. So it's kind of cool that we have. Does it work great? Yeah, I think it does pretty good. Could we do better? Yeah, but great that we have this, right? So really important information that you can have. Just as Don't go so fast, Tom. These are just some visuals for you, some of the things I just talked about. But I like that one word, one voice, start the conversation. There's our state campaign. And the website, preventsuicidect.org. Everybody here and everybody in the audience are going to go to the browser. They're going to go to that website, and then you're going to save it. That's another homework assignment. Because that's, for Connecticut, that's the depository of all the stuff going on with suicide prevention, postvention, and grief support in Connecticut. You can get all kinds of support groups, all kinds of resources for schools, for towns, for employers, all kinds of information there. So very important. So out in the audience, you can do the same thing, please. Put that in your browser. Great resource for you, just in case you need it. So we need to create a culture, and as it says, to be smart about mental health and suicide prevention. Just changing the culture, pulling those layers away, the stigma layers away from the word suicide will all go to help, for sure. I have one more slide, but I wanted to see if there was any questions in the audience. I can't do it over the TV, but anybody, any kind of questions? Yes?
Not a question, but a comment. So the One Voice, I know that sometimes they'll give out magnets or even shopping bags. And just a story, I brought my shopping bag, I think it was with the training with you, into Stop and Shop, and somebody stopped and asked me, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And we ended up doing a quick referral, just because somebody was brave enough to ask me what that is. So you just never know who's struggling, and some people are looking for signs or connection, and you can really make a difference when you're not even looking to do so.
Yeah, the statement was that the preventsuicidect.org has all kinds of free stuff. And here through the school system, we've done some training that's had those materials. And somebody in our audience, if you didn't hear, shared that they saw the One Word, One Voice bag and asked, and then was able to connect to help. That's what it's all about, yeah. So, and there's great stuff. I don't know if some of you in the audience are out on the video. The 13 reasons, that whole story thing, that Netflix did, I guess. There's some good news that when they changed the way they were producing it for the second one, because there was so much backslash. But there's a great thing that you can get that says 13 reasons why not poster from that site, free. So, and the same thing with American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We have lots of materials, and you can go on to afsp.org and you can go shopping, but please don't buy anything. You're going to call Tom or Mark and Jen, and we'll get it to you for free. So, and there's plenty of information, plenty of stuff. And if you go to the Out of Darkness walks, we will have all of that stuff that you're more than happy to take with you. But it's important to have those kind of materials because of the messaging. So good. Thank you for that comment. Yes, sir.
Yeah, of all the moods that you mentioned earlier, and you had a slide on this, is loneliness also part of that?
Yes, loneliness is, especially with our older population. Yeah, and I know, not the current first selectman, but a couple past, we talked a lot about that because we have people in Simsbury that are homebound, seniors, and are lonely. Yeah, and so yeah, there's a direct correlation. A lot of older folks too, and the example I give through the training is that, a husband and wife of 65 years, all of a sudden one of the spouses die. And so now the surviving spouse begins to feel that they're being a burden onto their family. And I just went through it. My mom passed away a year and a half ago, and my dad's still alive. He's doing really well. He went out and bought a sports car. So I think he's, at 88 years old, I think he's just doing fine. But we were worried about him, and then because that's what happens. And so I've done my thing for God and country, and in the loneliness cases, they stop eating, and there's no one to connect to them, and yeah, so yeah, good comment. Loneliness is absolutely, it can be a warning sign or a risk factor to somebody that maybe might be thinking about suicide. Any other questions? Yes.
Tom, are there any local support groups, or I know there's different support groups for different, cancer survivors and things like that. Are there support groups for survivors of suicide?
Yeah, the question is, are there support groups for lost survivors to suicide? Yes, there are a dozen across the state. The AFSP sponsors, and there's one here in Avon. And if you go to afsp.org/support groups, you can, and there'll be a drop list, and you click on Connecticut, and you'll see the list of support groups there. There are also new young adult support groups being formed through NAMNE, Connecticut. So if you go to NAMNE, Connecticut, they will connect you, and we're trying to share information now. Both the AFSP support groups and those NAMNE young adult support groups are on PreventSuicideCT.org website as well. So to answer your question, yes. And then there's a program called Healing Conversations, which is a really very effective program, again, that you can get from AFSP, afsp.org/healing conversations. You get the same drop list and click on Connecticut, and our lead volunteer, Ann Daigle, coordinates where volunteers actually go to the homes or communicate to those who have recently lost somebody to suicide. And what we find about that is it's such a tragic loss, just to have somebody come to talk and to listen and to understand what journey they are now on, has had really, really powerful success across the state. It's timely because, sometimes it's over the phone, sometimes it's either on Skype or FaceTime, and I'm a volunteer for that. I was on a phone here a few months ago with a couple out of Florida that needed help and support, and someone said something to somebody, and it was just, call that guy in Connecticut. So, and that's where the conversation. Really, really good program. All of those resources are available, and they're just a click away or a phone call away. Yes?
In my experience, it seems to me that one of the places mental health and suicide education could be used a lot is with college-level administrators. Mm-hmm. Because I think high school administrators get some of that, but teaching in a university, I've had the experience of having a kid come to me and say, I used to play baseball, I'm not interested in baseball anymore, and I did my work for a month, and now I'm not doing any work anymore. And my baseball coach even noticed this, and I don't care, I'm not interested in it. So you talk to him and you try to get him to do something, and ultimately he flunks the course. Mm. And you get a phone call later from an administrator who says, so-and-so wants to withdraw from the course. And you say, well, I think it'd be a good idea because I think that guy has a mental health issue.
Problem, right.
Well, he's done this before.
Right.
In other courses. Well, exactly.
Yeah, you would think that's a red flag, yeah.
Yeah, so I said, he may be depressed. I don't know exactly what's the problem with him, but he knows he has a problem. And you could make it conditional on his doing something about it. Like, let him withdraw this time, one more time, but he's got to go to counseling when he comes back. And I just got nowhere with the administrator. I walked a kid to counseling service who came with a set of problems. Because I figured I wanted to make sure she got there.
Right, good for you. That's the warm pass. Yep.
But, with the administrator, it was like, this is a lowly adjunct, and she doesn't know anything. So, there you go.
Yeah. So it kind of summarizes, because they're great great comment and question. That 18 to 25-year-old group is really hard to deal with, because in Connecticut here, there's all kinds of service for the under 18. But once they hit 18, I've talked to many families who are struggling with young people at home that have mental health or are troubled with some sort of mental health issue going on, and trying to find service can be really frustrating. On college campuses, it's HIPAA and HERPA, and once the kid turns 18, they can't call mom or dad, and the student is really beginning to fail and showing all kinds of signs, and how do you wrap around a safety net around that kid when you're not even allowed to talk to anybody? So my alma mater, Springfield College, and I've worked with the school administration, and they don't care about HIPAA and HERPA. They just assume get sued. But they think somebody's in trouble. They're calling mom and dad or wherever. And I'm so proud of my school, my alma mater's position on that. But it's just the reality of it. It's called a comprehensive disclosure, or not a comprehensive something where the student of 18 signs so that mom and dad can call, and the school can call mom and dad, but the student can go in the next week and pull it right out, and you can't talk anymore. So it's
Schools vary a lot, colleges vary
Yeah.
a lot on the level of services.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive disclosure form. So when I do training, especially with parents who are getting ready to send their kids to college, make sure. And they ask me, well, Tom, how would you know that they pulled it? I said, easy, just call the school. The school won't talk to you. It's gone. And then the next thing you do is you call your kid and tell them you're coming home. No more school unless that's on file all the time. Because I don't know all cases, but in a rare case, it could save a kid's life. Mom and dad usually are the ones picking up the bill. I certainly encourage parents to have that, so that professors and teachers and kids in the college level. But what about the kids that didn't go on to college, and are living out of mom or dad's basement and trying to get their life in order, and our children will be our children forever, regardless of their age. And when they're suffering, mom and dad wants to help out, and once they're 18, it's kind of hard. It's just one of those things. So, but good comment. Thank you for that. Yes. Are we good? I don't hear any screaming in the back. Good. One last slide, and Tom, who lives here in Simsbury, retired Y director. Why do you think Tom is doing all of this work? This is a picture of my son Tyler. And many of you in this room have heard me talk about Tyler. Tyler went to Simsbury High School for junior and senior year, went off to Savannah College of Arts and Design, and halfway through his junior year died by suicide. So now you know why I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about it. And I always share Tyler's story at the end of all of my trainings, because there's some messaging here that I want to share with you. What you learned today, if I'd known, his mother knew, his brothers, older, younger brother, his college professors, he might still be alive today. Because after he died and we started pulling back the layers, he had them all. Breakup, flunking out of school, car accident. I mean, all, that I think was a suicide attempt first before he actually died by suicide. So this stuff is really important, and I really, truly believe it, and it's my life's mission now to make sure that I educate and share. I show Tyler's picture. I miss him every day. Doesn't go a day go by that I don't miss him, and I thought about him before I came here today, because I look up there and I ask him, hey, Tyler, I'm doing the right thing? And I think he would say yes. But that focus on your dreams was his kind of favorite saying. And kind of fun story to tell you. The last summer I saw him alive was in 2009. And when you have older children, you go to vacation at places like Misquamicut, where there are nightclubs, so the kids don't have to drive. Oh, you want to go to a nightclub? Yeah, there it is, down there, go walk. And if you need a ride, call me later, I'll come get you. We were all on the beach, it's 100 stupid degrees, and he won't take his shirt off. And so, no, I don't want to. And everybody was kind of giggling. I don't know. I didn't think anything of it till after he died, and found out that he had a tattoo on his chest that said this saying, but it was inverted. So he could read it in the mirror. You couldn't read it looking at him, but he could read it in the mirror. And that was 4 or 5 months before he died. So I submit to you that was a coded message. Could have very well been. So great kid, miss him greatly. And thank you for letting me share that story with you. And so in closing, it took me a couple years to get over Tyler's death, and never over it, but to a point where I could get to the other side of this tragedy. And how I did with it was recognizing there's a hole in my life that will always be there. And so I respect it. I know it's there. It's his space. No one else will take it. So I decided to build a bridge over the hole, and I do that one board at a time. And so thank you for letting me add a board to my bridge today, because it truly is healing for me to come and talk to you and share with the audience of Simsbury TV what important messages are around suicide prevention, postvention, and grief support as we go forward. So thank you so much, and that's it for today. Thank you. And my information for those of you who want to call me, and that is my cell phone, but don't you dare text me. No, I'm teasing.
Thank you, Tom. We
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate. And I just want to thank SCTV for taping our program. And I hope that once the program is on SCTV, that you will share it with your friends, because it's an important conversation that we've all heard tonight. So don't be afraid to put it out there and let other people know. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.